Articulation of love. This love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, does not boast, is not proud, does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, nor easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away, as the verse continues. Reverend Tess Bomberger's expression of love is a bit more expansive, but it plays off these themes we see from Paul, love being a constant that is still moving with the human condition. For even Paul notes that love can be angered, as does Reverend Tess Bomberger. And she notes, I'm reading here real quick, love listens to the anger of those who experience oppression. Hears. It itself is slow to anger, especially at the start or end of life. And with anyone who the world discounts, yet anger can be a part of love. This has been hard for me sometimes to really feel. Early on in my time here. I had a little social faux pas when I was on the pulpit. And I have spoken about this before. It was well over a year ago, where in my nerves at being new with you, I said, I said, anger doesn't solve anything, which some of our people were like, what are you doing? Like, and you're right. They were right then and they're right now. And I know in my heart that this is right. I know that anger can be a part of love. And yet that can make love feel kind of scary. It makes love a bit different, right? Than the hallmark cardification of love that we are so often accustomed to. That love that is pure sweetness, saccharine, perhaps. And we'll talk more about how love can be perhaps not enough. I know for me, I've lived for a long time feeling like love was just all that we needed, and I still believe that love is the most powerful force in the world, but is it sufficient? Well, we'll hear more about that from Dr. King himself shortly. So many tabs. But when we have anger as an aspect of love, an expression of love, at least for me in my experience as a trans person, that anger that I might feel, that injustice that I experience, the anger I might feel when I witness the injustice foisted upon others, to express that anger can feel dangerous sometimes. Conflict can invite the worst kinds of things, particularly if we are on the margins. And I'll note what Dave said, where Dave mentioned he doesn't want to feel like a one-man resistance movement, right? None of us can be, really, especially when we are further from proximities of privilege and power. No, we need one another. We need one another. And when we suppress certain parts of love because they feel uncomfortable, when we choose to stay small, well, do we not feed the fires of that pandemic of loneliness and isolation? Because we're unable to connect in a more genuine way, to be real. And there is perhaps nothing more antithetical to the human spirit as an intractable loneliness. We are made to be together with other humans. It's not merely a part of who we are as individuals. It's hard-coded into what we are as creatures, as animals. I've spoken here before about the animal condition, of the human condition. And this more active, fiery, connected, complete love is part of that, just as recognizing our animal condition is part of being a more complete human. When we do not have others to connect with, we're denied a fundamental psychophysical need. In this state, we become ripe for the picking to those who would sell us a cheap love stripped of its fur and its claws and its fire, a love that can be folded into a piece of cardboard. It's swiped away with less than a thought, plasticized, and little more than a pretty distraction. I don't know about you, but I long for a deeper kind of love. Now, we're not merely dependent on others, of course. Love isn't desperate and needy. The love that Reverend Tess Bomberger, that Paul speaks of, is a love that is constant, that is with us and not reaching and grasping. It is not desperate. It is woven together in interdependence. Interdependence, needing others and they needing us in turn. And so the cycles of love complete, the ecologies of love weave together. As number 402 in our Singing the Living Tradition hymnal goes, to you I give, from you I receive, from this we live. When this cycle of reciprocity is realized, the ecologies of love are nurtured and love is magnified. And we may begin to realize our own place within it, not a passive or lazy love, not a love that's afraid of its own anger, of its frustrations, not a sickly love or sickly sweet or saccharine love, but y'all, a real love, deeper than deep, woven into the core of who and what we are, a love for whom the word love must feel necessarily insufficient. But alas, the English language does not afford us many alternatives, although Dr. King did speak on agape, or agape, that Greek concept of a higher love, the love like what a parent might provide to a child, the love that defends, the love that protects, the love that listens. And of course, this sort of broader and bigger love, it comes with its own sense of risk. The risk of buying into the cheap and sweet love that we are so often sold is that we must live with the dual consciousness of at once knowing of the injustice in the world and all that is denied to us, all that we deserve, all our worth and dignity being suppressed into something marketable. We must live with this dual consciousness of at once knowing all of this and the wanting in our own heart, the desire, the drive to speak, to sing, to shout. All this while pushing it down, numbing it away. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. Just grind. The risk of this deeper love is perhaps more threatening because it asks, what if I have to change? What if I have to change? What if I can't buy into an easy hopelessness and just coast through? Not my problem. Apathy goes hand in hand with that pandemic of loneliness and that isolation. Because caring can hurt sometimes. It eats at us, especially if we don't have a vehicle for expressing that care. And so what if we have to change and we can't be hopeless anymore? Hopelessness being a way that sometimes we excuse ourselves of our responsibility, abdicate the need to move. And here we are on a day where we are exploring the legacy and the life, reflecting on the work of a man who unequivocally called us to move so that we may feel our own chains. For indeed, as long as anyone on this planet suffers under the forces of oppression, none of us can truly be free. We can have a cheap imitation of freedom, but it won't be real. I want it to be real. Just like I want that connection to a deeper love that can't be discarded so casually. When I was a kid growing up in a more or less fundamentalist household, there was a ritual of sacred objects. You know, you cannot use the big, thick family Bible for your Hot Wheels ramp. And if you write anything with the word God on it, you're not supposed to throw it away, or it's disrespectful. And so love, God is to be equivalent with love, as it is said in the book of John, as other Christian mystics and thinkers and folks of all sorts have equated love to that ground of being and to God. How could we discard love so casually? Maybe we can aspire to a deeper sort of love that, as Reverend Tess Bomberger noted, is willing always to change, always to learn, always to heal. Love rejoices in truth and in equity, not inequity, in equity. Now, if love is willing to change, willing to learn, willing to heal, perhaps this love could be calling us to learn who we are, and in that learning, heal our wounds, that we may be a channel for this higher love which rises to defend both the self and the other. Who are we? Who are we? Who are you? no matter who we are, I reckon we are the ones who have been loved into being. Again, not a simply sweet, passive love, but a love that has weathered hardship, a love that makes us a part of something greater, a community like this congregation, or a family, or a friend group, heck, a species. A love that knows that it is neither its own alone nor ever truly on its own. A love that is you and all of you and all of us, if we might but realize the inherent worth and dignity of all and center on this liberating faculty of love. To lose ourselves a bit, yeah. And in return, know that we are big enough to weather the troubles and share our fire. That way we are not a one-person resistance movement. For such a thing is impossible. Against the wicked monolithic problems of our times, we need one another like never before. And never before has the myth of hyper-individualism been more destructive. When we recognize that the threads which weave our life together, the love, the streams which nourish us, which make us who we are, that these are our depths, and that these can be our sources of power. Now, when I remember this, things change. If I'm out and about in public, and it doesn't happen often, y'all, but occasionally there's transphobia in the air. It's Nebraska. It's the United States in 2023. What you gonna do? It can sometimes still feel really scary and make me feel like I need to kind of crumple away. But when I remember this, and I can remember that I belong to a love that is bigger than me, a love that is here and beyond here, that I'm part of something, and that something is part of me. I am an expression of this love that has made me who I am through the steam. I remember who I am, loved enough, even in the midst of this anger, which is real. I may yet be deliberate, for anger does not need to be a reactionary thing, as it is so often constructed to be, not in the face of injustice, the big injustice or the little injustice. Now, it can feel like we need to do something immediately when we feel anger in response to something in the world. And there is an immediacy, right? This is no real time for idle philosophizing. There is an immediacy to the wicked problems that we face, but that does not mean that we do not need to be or cannot be deliberate. We may be bigger than the cruelties, less of a sculpture of ice frozen and fragile, more of a deep lake fed by so many rivers of love, y'all, as a lake rising with water. Love, like gravity, must do her thing, dovetailing down the slopes, feeding other wells, and participating in the flows of love. We give, we receive, and in the midst of trial, we are still deep enough and strong enough together to do more than merely endure. I would be remiss not to mention the man on his own day. Dr. King puts it, justice rolls down like water. And with his understanding of justice at its best being power correcting everything that stands against love, more on that soon, that love that calls us together across all that would divide lines of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, wealth, origin, faith, into the home of love, where we can turn our anger and our sorrow and our stories into the stuff of action, the plan, and the energy, all being changed in the process. Us too, us too. Now, that Octavia Butler quote that I can never get out of my head: everything we touch, we change. Everything you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. And perhaps there's something to that, some ontological register of our being in this reality that is fundamentally about change. But we aren't simply at the mercy of change. And this is no time for hopelessness. No time to pretend like there isn't work to do. No time to be afraid of change, because it's happening. You best start believing in change. You're in it. But we have the opportunity to qualify and to characterize and to play a hand in that change. We are not so much at the mercy of it. Perhaps by claiming power Power, that's a heavy word. We'll get into that here in just a moment, y'all. We have a special video where we go into the homily. It's a recording of Dr. Martin Luther King's presentation speech, Where Do We Go From Here, delivered at the 11th Convention of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference way back on August 16th, 1967, not 8 months after Martin Luther King spoke these prophetic words. He will be shot in Memphis, Tennessee. He could not have known, but I imagine these words can characterize the response that one might need to have when something so traumatic and tragic happens. We may feel powerless in the face of catastrophe, in the face of loss. Hopelessness can set in, which engenders apathy, which fosters that lonely feeling that we try to combat so fiercely. Heed these words of this luminary of freedom and love.
What happened is that some of our philosophers got off base. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites. So that love is identified with a resignation of power and power with a denial of love. It was this misinterpretation that caused the philosopher Nietzsche, who was the philosopher of the will to power, to reject the Christian concept of love. It was the same misinterpretation which induced Christian theologians to reject Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power in the name of the Christian idea of love. Now, we got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best. Power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love.
Power without love is sentimental, is reckless and abusive. Power, love without power rather, is sentimental and anemic. Challenging. In an age of rising inequality, one in which wicked forces such as racism, religious intolerance, militarism have been institutionalized in the seat of power, power itself can become something of a dirty word. Perhaps you have heard that love is all that we need. Perhaps you have heard of the corrupting quality of power, how it warps the one who possesses it, or rather is possessed by it. It is true that power changes people. It is also true that love is a tremendous force in its own right, and love also changes people. When directed against one another as opposites, love versus power, what happens? Well, it seems clear to me. On the schoolyard of politics, power invariably throws love down to the ground time and again, for love is unarmed in this situation, as our barest vulnerabilities exposed. Politics is the domain of power. And politics isn't just elected officials, it's the landscapes of power in which we navigate all around us. If those who side with love are ever to be effective in that realm, we must become acquainted with the stuff of power, not as some means to exert dominance and control, but for the sake of breaking chains, both ours and others. Power, well, there's nothing wrong with it on its surface. If I had heard myself say this 8 years ago, I would have been like, what are you talking about? We don't trust politicians or powerful people here. Power is a thing that other people have. It's not a thing that you have. But that's not true at all, is it? That's not true at all, insofar as The world is changing and we are, in whatever little way, agents of change. Well, we may have a shard of power, seed, something there that we cannot afford to discount. Not now, not anymore. Now, in this video, Dr. King, he lays it out, expressing power at its best being the force of love, implementing the demands of justice. Here, power is not the end in itself, as it is so often treated by far too many political and economic leaders. It is the vehicle for justice, the arm of love reaching in to make action in the world, the realization of a liberating change, of a liberating love. And it's not been so long since I came to a different feeling about power. For a long time, I persisted in that distaste of power. And to some degree, I admit it still lingers. Power was something, like I said, other people have. And I had love, and that felt like enough. This might be true when it comes to waking up to our own worthiness. But it is insufficient in this world that calls us to more, that yearns for healing. We are called to magnify love, yes. And while love can ignite love in another as flames pass between candles, it is only by harnessing our power that we can organize these lights together to illuminate the deeds of those who would wield a loveless power. Folks who have allowed themselves to become bullies in high places. In and of itself, power is not good, nor is it evil. It is simply power. In the video, Dr. King names the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche and his treatment on the will to power. Now, for Nietzsche, power was not merely the pursuit of an individual, but was the fundamental register of reality beneath all of this. It was the force that pushes the world along its course, and us along with it through the agonies and ecstasies of life. Hopefully, in Nietzsche's philosophy, we come out the other side being able to affirm this life for all that it is, the beautiful and the terrible. That's how we become the Übermensch, the overman for Nietzsche, but one who conquers rather than is conquered by a life. It's a highly individualistic framework that intends to assert the will of the self against the hard world into which it is thrust. It is not without merit, y'all. Nietzsche's had a massive impact on this world, has had an impact on my life and in my theology. I appreciate much of Nietzsche's philosophy and do not want to discount it. And King is not discounting Nietzsche whole cloth here either, but I must agree with King that Nietzsche makes perhaps a mistake in equating power as the fundamental register. Or at least it isn't as useful as a philosophy that might center something else. Because in a world that believes power to be the primary driver, will we wind up in a place like this? In a place like this. If Nietzsche is correct in articulating power as the fundamental driver of the world, he might be to some extent. Love is not something we can be willing to discard on the way at all, because even the Übermensch needs a friend, y'all. Indeed, Nietzsche understood love to be an expression only those who have truly gone through the grinder in life could fully embrace. It is less that Nietzsche does not believe in love at all or thinks it as a thing we can toss out, and more that Nietzsche asserts love as a secondary element in the course of life, coming after we claim the will to power. And there might be something to that, y'all, because we do need to be able to acknowledge our own power. And perhaps it doesn't have to come with as much agony as Nietzsche insists it needs to. Maybe that's true if we are purely individuals, but we don't have to go through the heaviness of life alone. I believe we know this. We come here together to know that we are more than just ourselves. Become more, be changed in the presence of others. Now, when I was a philosophy major, I was often told by well-meaning folks in my family that I was wasting my time. I reckon one could look at this wounded world and see Nietzsche's philosophy all over Western society and beyond, for better and for worse. The House of Representatives, for example, see the effects of the will to power manifest in a society that too often views legislation less as a service to the public and more as a spectacle or a service to donors, brand image, clout within one's party. And this is the power of love, this is power without love. Power devoid, unordained by love, hollow, self-serving, reckless, and abusive, desperate to maintain its legitimacy by any means, even if it means perpetuating violent injustice against marginalized and desperate people. Y'all, just this month, here in Nebraska, Jim Pillen, your governor, denying federal aid money to needy families in Nebraska that would have provided food to children over the summer. He did this because he doesn't believe in welfare, citing ongoing programs that help families meet this need in the summer, but which require in-person attendance so that they can be monitored. A tremendous barrier to so many families in this state, particularly people of color, working families, folks living in the more rural parts of the state, y'all. It just seems cruel, doesn't it? Reckless and abusive. At the very least, it exhibits a tremendous lack of distrust, a tremendous lack of trust towards working families. I fail to find the love in this action. And in many of the actions taken by some of the state elected officials, just pure paternalism. I believe politics at its best might be empowering folks to make the best decisions for themselves, not necessarily deciding for others. This is how we try to be second Unitarian, empowering life, empowering decisions, empowering you, empowering others on the bottom to reach for something more. Now, I learned from my colleagues recently at the Progressive Clergy Alliance that Senator Kopp is back with her anti-trans legislation to block trans kids from sports teams that align with their gender identity, truly just creating problems where they do not exist for what? Cultivating a political brand image. Loveless power abounds, y'all. It abounds. Overwhelming, perhaps, that kind of stuff. Bullies in high places can make us feel like there's nothing we can do. We're just at the mercy of bad actors and bad ideas, often because we're afraid to claim the power that we have. Loveless power abounds, and so does powerless love. Powerless love feels terrible. It can burn so hot in us that we feel as if we need to turn away, but in doing so, we may lose ourselves again in that double consciousness of being aware of the brokenness of the systems we live in while having no mechanism to address it, no means of expressing it either within us or without. We forget our power just when we need it most, and in doing so, we run the risk of forgetting our love and falling into that frigid indifference of apathy. If folks want to talk about social contagions, like they talk about transness as a social contagion, which you know it's not, there's one for you. The ethic of not my problem. But we are in a time of many problems, friends, and it is all of our problem. Too many have abandoned love for power in pursuit of ambition, or power for love in pursuit of a cheap and personalized peace. Neither of these will save us. Nietzsche would have called the latter the last man fallacy, the idea that one can just watch the world go by and be at its mercies, distracted, and sentiment being anemic, or running rough over others for the sake of one's own ambitions. Neither of these will save us. Neither of these. We need to break bread, friends, with the power of our own power at the altar of love, and recognize that this is merely a form of energy to be leveraged, an energy which each and every person may carry and share with others, in varying degrees, of course. It is the expression of our inner strength, the very force of change itself. It's also the expression of our material strength in our body and in our wallet and in all that we are. These are going to be different. We will not all have the same expressions of power, and yet all are called. Some will have more to share and some will have less. Some will be able to show up in person to a protest or an event. Some will not. But nonetheless, we don't need to be doing all the same thing. Monolithic efforts are fragile. They are rigid and uncompromising. Multiplicitous approaches not only empower all of us to find our own power and do what we can to contribute in the ways that which we are able, but it also makes it impossible to stop, for this is the world which those who rule with loveless power fear the most. Multiplicity, coming from multiple angles, love, fueled by a power that drives it, coming from the bottom to the top. Right. Only power can allow love to do this, and only love can temper power, that we don't become lost in ego or forget our own love. We may rescue power from those whose legitimacy is maintained in no small part by a collective unwillingness to take the leap of courage and claim power, not as a fundamental register, no, but as a necessary energy, which is ours too. And yet I reckon we may be putting the cart ahead of the horse if we do not begin with the rescue of love. Now, what do we mean by love here? Rev. Tess Bomberger's poem or the articulation from Paul, these are valid, and a found handwritten note revealed in 2020, allegedly written by Dr. King. It sure does sound like something he would say. He is said to have defined love as the greatest force in the universe, the heartbeat of the moral cosmos, noting that one who loves participates in the being of God. King agreed with the author of the Gospel of John, who observed that God is love, and God being the ground of being, the primary register of reality for King, like many mystics before him, he may have named love itself as that primary register of reality. Now, that is some speculation on my part. King defined love in many ways, but this love was at once transcendent in its majesty and immanent in its being made real through creatures such as us. This portrays a theology characterized by a love empowered by justice, not a sticky, sweet saccharine love, but the heavy love, y'all, of a mother's embrace, the love that defends and protects, which liberates and elevates and illuminates. It is sweet, but it is not shallow. You might also look to the theologian Paul Tillich, who wrote on love and power. And Tillich defined love as the drive towards unity of the separated, the part of you that longs for freedom for a stranger, someone you'll never meet, for liberation for the oppressed on the other side of the world, who mourns at the tragedies unfolding in Gaza and Ukraine. This is the love singing in your heart, friends. Metaphysics or pure meat, it really doesn't matter. This is the love that King and Tillich speak of. And it's real. It's real. It's an emotive faculty and perhaps as something more. Nonetheless, it's in us. Just as one can be possessed by the power that they wield, mayhaps we can be possessed by this power. To rescue such a love entails reformatting of priorities, one that moves away from efforts to overthrow and into an organic fostering of grassroots power, informed from the outset by love, the love that is already with us from the beginning. Nietzsche may have held the perspective that power was beneath our bones, but do we not come into this world through some union? Is every child not at the very least worthy of love? Even if love were not experienced, the mark of its lack leaves on the heart, illustrates its fundamental necessity. We need love and we need power to see that love made real in the world. And on this day, preceding what I hope may be for you a holy day as well, a day set aside to reflect on the legacy of this luminary of love and justice that is Dr. Martin Luther King, I would lovingly challenge you to consider your power and your love. Ask yourself this: where have you witnessed loveless expressions of power in this world, not only in legislation, but hey, in churches, social groups, your own life? Ask yourself this: where have you experienced powerless expressions of love? Ask yourself this, friends: where have you witnessed love and power coming together in a righteous and generative synthesis? And I hope you can reflect I hope you can reflect on these with me tomorrow, and perhaps keep these considerations in your heart as the legislative session unfolds. If you're feeling a fire to make some change in your community, I'd like to extend an invitation for you to check in with our social justice team after worship next Sunday, January 21st, 12 p.m. You can join in person or on Zoom. You might also check with our social justice leaders, particularly Sherry Cody, to learn about our congregation's involvement with the Omaha Together One community. It's an interfaith, broad-based community organizing initiative that we've been making good trouble with for quite a few years. But the cultivation of power may often be construed as an individual pursuit. If it's to be tempered by love, then it must be expressed in community, because love cannot exist in a silo or on its own. Whoever you are, I hope you can share your gifts, fold yourself into the liberating work that's happening right here in Omaha. You are called. Prophetic Church, this world awaits your liberating ministry. You go into this world and be fools for love, pilgrims for justice, and until we meet again, may we rock, roll, and move in that spirit of beloved community we're heading towards on the horizon. Go in peace.